I do believe that the main risk today is a risk of division of the world, and a division between the two superpowers. And the instruction given to all the others, you have to choose your side. If we do so, we will kill the global order, and we will destroy, methodically, all the institutions we created after the Second World War in order to preserve peace and to have cooperation on health, on climate, on human rights, and so on. But we need them, probably much more than before. This is why I believe our key challenge is how to preserve peace and stability and prosperity in this current environment. And in a moment when the competition between China and the United States for global leadership could create constraints and a side effect for each of us, without us willing or even able to imagine handing our interests over to one or the other, how to react. And I will be clear. France is a friend and an ally of the United States, and is a friend, and we do cooperate, even if sometimes we disagree and compete with China. I do intend to remain so, loyally, with a demanding approach of our own interests. But France is no less attached to what is essential for herself: strategic autonomy, freedom of sovereignty. And we do defend this approach for Europe and for Indo-Pacific, which means we want to cooperate, but we don't want to depend. We want to cooperate, but we don't want to be instructed on a daily basis what is allowed, what is not allowed, and how our life will change because of the decision of a single person. And the commitment by France is part of a long-term commitment. It's a singular voice, faithful to a certain idea of peoples and their independence, which General de Gaulle set out in 1966 in a speech in Phnom Penh. And this idea remains the compass of France, and we intend to continue being a force for peace and equilibrium. Having said that, I do believe that Europe and Asia, and this is my second point, have a common interest in this very moment, and a common interest to follow this line of strategic autonomy. First, because we live the same challenges. We have a challenge of revisionist countries that want to impose, under the name of spheres of influence, in reality, spheres of coercion. Countries that want to control areas from the fringe of Europe to the archipelagos in the South China Sea, at the exclusion of regional partners, oblivious to international law. Countries that want to appropriate resources, whether fishing or mineral, and crowd out others from their benefit. Countries that want to impose on free countries their foreign policy choices or prejudice their alliances. No way for these spheres of coercion. Second, we have the challenge of terror and enduring mutual grievances that remains all too present, and we saw it very recently again in the region. And it is compounded by the alarming propensity of countries to resort to force, including between heavily armed states, as we saw it as well very recently. Third, we live in a time of a potential erosion of long-time alliances, whose credibility and clout is under threat. Alliances, by the element of balance they brought, had been essential to maintain stability in Europe and Asia. And the sense that their promise might not be ironclad is ushering in a new instability. We see it every day. And the credibility of the alliances, which is to be confirmed, is a very important point for stability. Fourth, we have now a big risk of nuclear proliferation. This is why the situation in Iran is so critical, and this is why we do consider that the work which is being done by the United States of America in Iran is so critical. And this is why, especially the E3 wants to be a reliable and consistent partner in order to avoid any type of nuclear proliferation in Iran, because it would trigger all sorts of justification to proliferate elsewhere with a domino effect. But let's be clear, the situation is very challenging as well in Europe. When Ukraine, the country that renounced nuclear weapons in 1991, is the one that Russia is repeatedly invading, how could there not be a second thought? When the DPRK is developing a massive nuclear arsenal unconstrained by China and is now entering an alliance with Russia, a nuclear weapon state, permanent member of the UN Security Council, supposed to act responsibly, how are regional countries threatened by the DPRK supposed to act? What can reasonably be on their mind when they owe their people, before anything else, their security? In Europe and in Asia, how can mid-sized countries faced with aggressive nations ensure that they won't have to surrender or live in fear? But sure enough, our challenges are not only similar, they are getting increasingly intertwined. They are intertwined because when you look at this situation, during the past few years, I had objected to NATO having any role in Asia, because for me, N is for North Atlantic. And because I don't believe in being enrolled in someone else's strategic rivalry. But what's happening with North Korea being present alongside with Russia on the European soil is a big question for all of us. And this is why, if China doesn't want NATO being involved in Southeast Asia or in Asia, they should prevent, clearly, DPRK to be engaged on the European soil. All this is happening also at a moment when nations like France and Asian countries are facing issues of scale raised by the development of technology, and I clearly make the linkage between these two issues. Our challenges are intertwined because we do face the same reality. Whether we are talking about AI or space, scale is of the essence. And in these two critical dual-use technologies, the first to reach scale will be much more competitive and will drive out the others. And we can't lose the race. And this is why, by the way, we want to team up with Singapore on all these issues, and we have a very strong partnership. But this is how we are clearly linked together in these common challenges. Another race we cannot afford to lose is that of hybrid warfare. With cyber and disinformation, there is a clear attempt to undermine our democracies, our social cohesion, sometimes even our territorial integrity, and all this is done with underlying geopolitical aims. And clearly, this is the same here and in Europe.